10,000 extra police on the streets of London. The authorities are trying to quell the looting and rioting across the city. I'm Lise Doucette. Welcome to The Hub. It's been called the worst night of violence in London in years. Hundreds of people have been arrested. A man shot in Croydon in South London dies of his injuries. Britain's Prime Minister confirms he will recall Parliament. He vows those responsible will be brought to justice.
This is criminality, pure and simple, and it has to be confronted and defeated.
In other news, Asian markets again reflect global economic fears. They end the day sharply down. But in the US, markets rose a bit in the opening hours of trading. And inside the world's biggest aid camp, how Somali refugees are still struggling for survival. Hello and welcome. First on The Hub, police in London are braced for a fourth night of tension after 3 days of rioting and looting across the capital, described as the worst in living memory. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, said 10,000 extra police are being drafted to respond to what he called criminality, pure and simple. At least 10 areas of London have been affected so far, in Clapham. But other parts of England also saw unrest. Liverpool, Birmingham, Bristol, as well as smaller cities like Oxford and Reading. These unprecedented scenes prompted the Prime Minister to cut short his summer holiday. He's returned to the UK and says those responsible will face the consequences. He's recalled Britain's Parliament as well for one day on Thursday to debate the crisis. So far, several sporting events have been cancelled. They include England's football friendly with the Netherlands on Wednesday night at Wembley Stadium. But test events ahead of the London Olympics of next year, including beach volleyball, cycling and badminton, will go ahead as planned. For a look at all the day's developments, we have this report from Isabel Webster.
For a few hours last night, anarchy came to the streets of London. This is what happens when a fear of the police evaporates. The worst of the fires were in Croydon. A photographer caught the moment when a woman leapt for her life from a burning building. The mobs were feral, unabashed, ruling the streets. In Barking, this film shows a youth cowering on the ground, a pool of his blood on the floor. At first, a rioter appears to help him before they ransack his bag, rob him and leave him in their wake.
He just took something from his bag.
These scenes are from Woolwich, but they could have been from Hackney, Lewisham, Peckham, Ealing, Clapham, or any of dozens of places.
Let's get some watches, fam.
It was the third night of rioting, apparently sparked by the shooting of Mark Duggan in Tottenham by police on Thursday. But Mr. Duggan's family have condemned the disorder, calling it distressing. At daybreak, the scale of the damage became apparent. The shops the police had been unable to protect. And there were calls this morning for local communities to help the police deal with the looters.
The message to so many local people is please get your kids in off the street, and if your child has new trainers today or has suddenly acquired something that they didn't have yesterday, ask them some tough questions about why they got it. And if you think they got it through looting, you march them down to the police station and hand them over, because a lot of parents, grandparents, extended family members need to ask some tough questions of their young people this morning.
Similar sentiments were expressed several miles away in Ealing, this time by furious shopkeepers.
I've come here this morning, all my clothes are strewn all over Ealing Green here. It's absolutely disgusting. They are feral rats. What are those parents doing? Those children should be at home. They shouldn't be out here causing mayhem. I'm absolutely livid, as is everybody else here.
This morning, the Prime Minister returned to Britain. After a meeting of the emergency committee COBRA, he visited senior police officers to discuss strategy.
I am determined, the government is determined, that justice will be done and these people will see the consequences of their actions. And I have this very clear message to those people who are responsible for this wrongdoing and criminality. You will feel the full force of the law. And if you are old enough to commit these crimes, you are old enough to face the punishment.
This afternoon, Mr Cameron shook the hands of firefighters in Croydon and saw for himself some of the damage. In Clapham Junction, the Mayor of London showed his support for the big clean-up, but still faced some difficult questions from victims.
You talk about robust policing, what does that actually mean?
Tonight we are going to have a huge number of police on the streets, and I understand
Where
that.
were they? By 5 o'clock we knew they were going to hit, and no one was here. I was in the salon when a brick got through the wall, through the window.
This morning, the Met said that every police cell in London was full to capacity. Suspected looters have been transported to stations outside the capital. A warehouse belonging to the electronics company Sony was still billowing smoke, even as police steel themselves for what may lie ahead. Isabel Webster, BBC News.
And we're now getting reports in from Manchester in the northwest of England that around 70 to 80 young people are involved in a standoff with police there. It's taking place near a shopping precinct in Salford. We'll keep an eye on that situation and any of the others that arise. But for the moment, let's just discuss what's been happening, these unprecedented scenes on the streets of London. I'm joined here in the studio by Lara Oyedele. She's the chief executive of the Oduduwa Housing Association in London, which works to find homes for young, primarily black homeless people. And now you live in Tottenham,
Yes, I do.
where it all began. You've lived there since 1998. When you saw the violence starting there, spilling onto the streets, what was your reaction?
I was completely and utterly shocked. I was very disappointed that this was again happening in the neighbourhood that I live in. But like I've already said, I was not surprised that this has happened. This was a long time coming. There's a lot of disaffection in the area. The young children don't have anything to do with their time. And I'm not saying that the violence is right, but the question that the government needs to be asking is why? Why are the children doing this?
Why would they go for, the Prime Minister has called it criminality pure and simple, those scenes of looting, whole shops being pillaged. Why would it this disaffection result in looting?
I'm not saying that the disaffection immediately results in looting, but I just think it's because the children have been bored. They have had nothing to do. They're roaming around the streets with no direction, no aim, no motivation, no plans, no future. And any little bit of excitement is something that they latch onto. And unfortunately, it's just gotten out of hand. And I think that's the answer. The children need direction. They need motivation. They need opportunities that they're not getting at the moment.
And so who do you look to? Do you look to parents? Do you look to the government? Do you look to the business community to provide jobs?
I think it's a combination of issues. It's a very complex situation. And one of the things I've noticed is that, for instance, people who are graduates, who have first degrees, college graduates, are applying for jobs that they would normally not have applied for, say, 5-10 years ago. So the people just below them, who are A-level students, are applying for the jobs that they wouldn't have applied for a few years back. So which means those at the bottom of the pile that have no qualifications, have nothing to aspire to. They can't get the minimum wage jobs because you've got college graduates applying for those jobs. So I think there's a combination of resolutions which are to do with I don't know, the cost of education, the morality imparted to children from their parents, because I do also have the question that says, where are the parents of these children that are running around the streets at 9 o'clock at night? Why are they not at home? So parents obviously have something to do with it, but I think most importantly, there's the cut in community resources, the cut in council resources for young people. For me, that's one of the bigger things, because I'm convinced that had there been the right amount of training schemes, youth centres and those kind of facilities, these children would not be running around the streets as we speak.
And you describe them as bored. Would you also describe them as angry?
Oh yes, certainly. bored, angry, disaffected. They're basically saying, listen, no one's listening to me. I have nothing to lose, so who cares? You know, and I think that's the message that I'm getting from the many young people that I've spoken to over the last year.
But then that's very a frightening prospect, because there's no way, even with the best will in the world, you can't create jobs immediately.
You can't create jobs immediately, but I do feel that there's a sentiment that's coming from the government at the moment which says, it almost says, we don't care about you guys. You know, it's all about big business, it's all about big changes, and the little people, in literal and metaphorical senses, are being squeezed. And the young people are saying, you're not listening to us, but obviously now they are being listened to.
Lara, thank you for coming in.
You're welcome.
Good luck in Tottenham.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Let's for a moment, we're going to return to the riots in London later in the programme. But for a moment, let's look at some of the other top stories this hour. Turkey's foreign minister has had talks in Damascus with the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad amid growing international condemnation of a brutal crackdown on civilian protesters. Ahmet Davutoglu was expected to press for an end to this bloodshed. Further operations by Syrian government tanks have been reported, this time in Binish, near the Turkish border. Human rights activists say at least 21 more people have been killed. The death toll is said to have gone over 2,000 in weeks of protest. The Libyan rebel leader Mustafa Abdul Jalil has sacked his de facto cabinet. This comes in response to the killing of the rebel military chief Abdel Fattah Yunus by an allied faction last month. The spokesman said there had been shortcomings in the way some members of the rebels' National Transitional Council had handled the matter. In New York, the hotel maid who's accused the former head of the IMF, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, of attempted rape has now brought a civil lawsuit against him. In the suite, Nafisiata Diallo accuses Mr. Strauss-Kahn of carrying out a violent and sadistic attack against her in his hotel suite in New York in May. Mr. Strauss-Kahn has denied the allegations. Asian markets got off to a bad start today amid fears of a double-dip recession in the United States and continuing economic woes in Europe. Hong Kong shares plummeted more than 6% in the first few minutes of trade. Japan's Nikkei index fell nearly 5%. South Korea's Kospi lost more than 7% before recovering slightly. All this follows a disastrous day on Wall Street. Monday saw the Dow slip to its lowest since 2008. Well, we're joined now by Terry Smith, the Chief Executive of Tulit Prebon, about the markets. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, there seemed to be a little bit of a positive rally in New York when the markets opened. Is that something to see some hope in, or?
Nope.
Just how were we to interpret that?
It's a dead cat bounce. Nothing goes up continuously or goes down continuously. There are always corrections. People take profits, including short sellers who may have been short of the market, take them. So no, I won't read anything into it. Reading something into 1 day's trading or 1 month's job figures isn't what this is about.
But when you look at what happened with the Asian markets closing sharply down, what would you read into that?
I'd read the same into the Asian markets as I read into every other market, basically. This is not about the equity markets primarily, it's about debt. The countries in the West basically are too indebted. The sovereign borrowers in the West, in the Eurozone, in the UK and the United States had big deficits before the financial crisis. They took those up to support the banks, and they've now got unsustainable debt levels, and they've got to come down.
But they're not going to come down anytime soon, and as you know, these are not just financial problems, these are huge political problems, both in the United States as well as across Europe. So it's quite a bleak prospect then for the markets.
It's a very bleak prospect. This is not a position you should engineer yourself in, where you actually run a deficit for several years before a crisis, during a boom, and then experience a financial crisis. If you look back in history to the Great Depression in the 1920s and 30s, or to a thing called the Long Depression in the 1870s in America, a financial crisis like that leads to a very long and painful period. There isn't any easy way out of this.
But is there more? We've heard Barack Obama trying to ease these fears on the markets. We've had, senior leaders, both financial and political, across Europe, trying to send the message that they've got the situation under control. They'll deal with it. Temporary solves.
Nobody trusts them. It's an elastoplast. You actually need to cut government spending in order to get the finances back on an even keel. That's the only thing that people will trust, and I'm afraid there's no plan for that whatsoever.
Tough talk, but I'm sure you're right. Thank you very much for coming in. Okay. You're watching The Hub with me, Lisa Doucette. Coming up in the programme, we'll look back at how the world's most wanted terrorist was caught, why relations between the US and Pakistan are said to be at breaking point.